Hi, Honors Biology. This is Miss Willis here, and I am here to talk to you about eukaryotic cells today instead of prokaryotes. What we're going to do in this lecture is go through all the unique parts that a eukaryotic cell has and give you a little background as to their function. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Eukaryotic cells have a true nucleus. So they do have a structure within their cell membrane, and its whole purpose is to house the DNA. So it protects the DNA in this little structure we call a nucleus. Eukaryotic cells, they also have parts in them that are called organelles. And like the word says, little organs, these are parts of the eukaryotic cell that perform specific functions to make the cell operate. And if you're wondering what is a eukaryotic cell, any plant, animal, or fungi cell is classified as eukaryotic. Take a look at this diagram here, and you can see the main differences between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. So like we stated in the last lecture, prokaryotes, they're very small and they're very simple. They are thought to be the first life forms here on Earth, and they contain things like a cell membrane, a cell wall, DNA, and ribosomes, and they usually have some sort of flagellum or cilia for movement. That's about as simple as you can get. If you take a look at the picture to the right and you see the eukaryotic cell, you can see there are a lot more parts to the eukaryotic cell. They're definitely more complex, and they do have a home for the DNA called a nucleus. So those are some of the big differences that you see between the two. Now, the eukaryotic nucleus has its own structure. So if you just take a look at the picture here, you can see that inside the nucleus, you definitely have the genetic material of the cell. There are also some other parts. The nucleus is surrounded by what's called a nuclear envelope, and inside that envelope, there are little holes that are called nuclear pores. You're going to see why that is important when we talk about transcription and translation and how to make a protein, because that is actually how a message gets out of the nucleus to go make a protein. There's also a little structure called the nucleolus that's found in the nucleus, and this is made up of a clump of nucleic acids and proteins that you can find in the nucleus. Taking a look at the picture to the bottom right, you will see that when you look under a microscope, the nucleus is usually the darkest ball of thing that you can see on the microscope. And then also inside that, you can usually see the nucleolus, which is like a dark little ball inside the nucleus. Prokaryotes and eukaryotic cells, they both contain a cell membrane. And just like we stated previously, the cell membrane is what we call semi-permeable because it does let some things in, but not all things. It's composed of two lipid bilayers, two lipid layers. And in case you forgot, lipids are fats. We call this a lipid bilayer because it's made of two layers. The head, so in the picture to the bottom right, the heads are the little pink circles, and they are hydrophilic. So that means they like water, and that helps the cell because it does draw water closely into the cell. However, in the middle part is where you're going to find the tails of the lipids, and these tails are hydrophobic. So they don't necessarily like water, and so they stay within the inside of the cell membrane, and they kind of hang to themselves. Now we are getting into the lysosomes, or what I like to think of as the cleanup crew. These organelles can only be found in animal cells, and they contain enzymes to pretty much break down things in the cell that need to be broken down. So a lot of times that is macromolecules that are in the cell. So those big molecules we talked about in first semester, that is usually what they target. I am sure all of you are familiar with the mitochondria, or mitochondrion if you're talking about it singularly. We always hear that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, right? You've probably heard that numerous times. This is an organelle that can be found in the animal and plant cell, and its whole purpose is to take sugar and break it down into something called ATP. ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and it's the main energy chemical that is used in cells. The structure of the mitochondria is pretty unique. It's actually double membrane, just like you're going to see in the chloroplast. There's an outer membrane of the mitochondria, and then you'll see there's also an inner membrane, and the inner membrane is folded into these little things we call cristae. Now, the chloroplasts can only be found in plants and algae. So these are not found in animal eukaryotic cells. So this is a plant and algae organelle. It's also double membrane, just like the mitochondria. And its function is to take sunlight and turn it into glucose energy, a chemical energy for the cells. This is the process that you probably already know about called photosynthesis. So chloroplasts, the chlorophyll pigment in the chloroplast is taking in sunlight, absorbing that sunlight, and it's running a series of reactions where at the end you do generate glucose. Now what's crazy is that plants, they generate and make this glucose, and then what they do is they break it down in their mitochondria to generate ATP. Animals, however, we cannot do that. We simply take other organisms' glucose and then we break it down for our own ATP usage. The next part that you're going to find in eukaryotic cells is called a vacuole, and a vacuole is mainly used for storage in cells. In a plant cell, the vacuole tends to be quite large and usually in a central location. However, in animal cells, they tend to be smaller and found throughout the cell. Just like in prokaryotes, eukaryotes also can sometimes have a cell wall. Cell walls are only found in plants and fungi eukaryotic cells. Animals do not have cell walls. And in plants, the cell wall, it serves as a barrier, just like it did in prokaryotic cells. And so this barrier is meant to protect the cell. In plants, however, the cell wall is made of a carbohydrate called cellulose, and in fungi, it's made of a substance called chitin. So it just depends on what cell you're talking about. There's different types of cell walls that exist and what they're made of, but their main purpose is for protection. The Golgi apparatus, or sometimes called the Golgi complex or the Golgi body, is a funny looking structure that can be found in eukaryotic cells. It's made of a whole bunch of kind of condensed, flattened membranes and sacs. And the purpose of the Golgi apparatus is to package proteins into these little structures called vesicles. You can see them here in the picture. They're just like little pink balls. And so they enter into the Golgi apparatus, they package the proteins, they store them, they modify them, and then of course they send them out to places that they need to go in. So if you want to think about it like an analogy sake, this is more like the UPS. They are delivering packages out through the cell. And then the last part that we're going to talk about today in the eukaryotic cell is something called the endoplasmic reticulum, or also known as the ER for short. There's two different types you can find in a eukaryotic cell. There are the smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and there's also the rough endoplasmic reticulum. And like you can see on the screen here, there are differences in their functions. So the smooth ER, it makes fats, it metabolizes carbs, and it detoxifies drugs. However, the rough ER and its main function is to provide a site where proteins can get made. And the reason why it's called the rough ER is because it does have ribosomes blended into the ER. So if you just look at the picture there, you can see the light pink is smooth, and then that dark pink purple is rough, and that's because it is covered in ribosomes, which are the sites where proteins are made. All right, everyone, well, that covers the basics of the eukaryotic cell parts, and I hope that was extremely helpful. Have a good one.